I am unashamed. What about you?
Welcome back to Unashamed podcast. So, Jase, I'm in the Atlanta airport last night, and this person rudely sits down behind me, shakes all the chairs, and I kind of look over my shoulder, and it's Zach.
I gave him like a zerp. You know what a zerp is?
A zerp.
A zerp. You like take your two fingers and you like get them in the side, like their rib cage. And
It used to be in my fat side, but now that I'm losing all this weight, now he actually got to.
And I've got the camera on my cell phone, and I'm doing like I'm trying to record the whole thing so I could like surprise him.
I'm not familiar with yuppie dialogue or phrases that came from a world.
Well, when you're in an airport, there's a lot of strange people already, so it just kind of fit into.
I was flying in town.
He was coming here, and I didn't even know you were going to be here, so I was shocked.
Is that why you were like 30 minutes late? You were on East Coast time?
I was on East Coast time.
Yeah, we're sitting here waiting. I was like, well, it doesn't do much good for Zach to be in town if he doesn't show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was embarrassing. So, speaking of embarrassing, okay, so I took a little trip, had a date night with my wife a few days ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was. It was one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened.
On date night.
On date night.
Yep. So just think, you plan all this, it's going to be great.
And you've had a lot of embarrassing things happen in your life.
Really?
You may not realize it, but yeah.
No, I didn't. I mean, look, you got to have thick skin in life. So we went to the season 5 premiere of The Chosen, and it was in Dallas. Last year it was in L.A., which was very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, it's not good.
So not that I don't like L.A., I just don't want to be there. But we went. We took it for the team. So this year it's in Dallas because I think that's their kind of hub.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah, where they
film outside of Dallas, I think.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So here we go. So here we decided to do something. Look, I'm going to confess in this story my personal problems here. And one of them I realized is when you're in a world like we're in, you have people who set up trips. And I've been doing this for years. It's a team. I have a team of people. But what that leads to is then you're no longer able to function as a normal human being.
Without the team.
Yeah. You just can't do it. But
you became a victim of your own success.
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I said this is embarrassing.
Yeah.
It is literally embarrassing. Because Missy said, well, I think we'll just drive over. It's just Dallas because we go there all the time.
Because in the old days, you would just get in your car and drive to Dallas and do something.
You would think a normal human being in their 50s would be able to pull that off.
And that's most normal people can do that, Judge, just so you know.
I mean, luckily, my marriage is in a good place. They just had a marriage seminar yesterday, and I was like, I think we passed this test because everything that could go wrong went wrong, and it was our own fault.
Yeah,
because
you didn't have your little guide there to.
We took the wrong turns. we were supposed to be there. I think the festivities started at like 3, so we did the math. 4 hours over there, basically. But we were coming in, the longer we got delayed and took wrong turns and all that. I mean, you drive on interstate and you get off. Doesn't seem like a hard thing, but it just...
Well, it does when you go to Dallas.
You wanted to go to the hotel first because you didn't want to... Because you have to get kind of spiffed up for this, which I don't...
Was there a red carpet involved in this?
Well, it's a teal carpet.
Teal carpet.
Yeah. I think the colors of The Chosen is like teal because it's different.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like a teal carpet.
I got you.
So we pulled up. The show, according to the note, started at 7. And so we got there early. 6:57 is when we pulled in.
So you missed the red carpet. Or the teal
Well,
carpet.
not quite. We got out. People didn't recognize me. You're supposed to park. We got your tickets on your phone. It got complicated. Since we didn't have anybody doing this, then we couldn't find the tickets. And finally, somebody recognized me along the route to park. And so we just walked in like we owned the place. Like outside is where the teal carpet was. And the time we get there, and they got you kind of like cattle. you go through whatever your status is, you go through a certain corridor, but it's outside. You got fans around. People were recognized, which was good. Because I kept running into problem because we didn't have the credentials. And we wind up, and the cast is taking the last picture on the teal carpet. And Dallas and Amanda, who we're friends with, and we support them, they're up there taking the picture. So they're like, well, it's pretty well over now. Did y'all want to take a picture with the cast? And Missy's like, no, we kind of just wanted to take a picture with our friends. And they're like, who are your friends? We're like, Dallas and Amanda Jenkins. They're like, well, they pretty much run this thing. Yeah, we know. We just want one picture. So the guy, he goes over, and I see him whispering in Dallas's ear because there's thousands of people out here. And I was like, this is a key moment here. Because he might just say no.
If he says no, then you're back to the banishment.
Don't really, should we be here, But he looked up and said, okay, yeah, they're in. So that was the key move for what happens next. So we get up there, take a picture. Good to see you. I didn't know y'all were going to be here. I mean, they didn't even know we were coming.
Yeah.
Because
you didn't have a team of people doing all the legwork.
Didn't have a team of people. And, with my parents and everything going on, we were a last minute declaration. And that proved to be a problem. So they gave us these little bracelets once we've been legitimized by the director of the show.
Yeah.
They're now like, okay, we'll go ahead and give you some credentials. You're supposed to be here. So I thought, okay, this is great. So we took the picture. Well, we're talking because now we're in the right corridor with the guy directing it and his wife and the cast, but we're moving as one. We're catching up with our friends. So we go into the theater. Well, there's multiple rooms in the theater. And so as we get to the security line, which is like 5 people, and they're not checking the credentials of the cast and the director because obviously everyone knows who they are. Well, they look at us and they're like, I look for our bracelet. Well, I've lost it.
Oh, boy.
In a 5-minute walk, I lost it.
A team of people couldn't have helped you with that. That's just stupid.
And so they said, where's your bracelet? Well, Missy didn't have hers on because it didn't match her dress.
Oh, gosh.
So now we don't have our bracelets, but they looked and they're like, well,
you kind of look like an extra, though. So.
So where are your credentials? And I said, right here. I pointed to Dallas Jenkins. I was like, I'm with him. I said, oh, okay. But he didn't even know we were coming.
Yeah.
So we get in the room and I start having this conversation with Peter from the show.
Not the real Peter.
Yeah, he's not really.
Who plays Peter.
Well, the guy who plays Peter. But in your mind.
Big distinction.
In your mind, though, it was like.
I do this thing in my speeches where I'm like, close your eyes and picture God.
Yeah.
And most people see nothing or a big light or an old man with a gavel.
Yeah.
But here recently, it's been the guy from The Chosen.
Yeah.
So in your mind, it does something to you. Because I'm talking to Peter here. But Peter, I thought he speaks English on the show because Missy whispered in my ear, I don't think he speaks English. Because everything I said, he was just bewildered. And Missy said, does he speak English? And Dallas said, I don't think he speaks Jase's English.
I was going to say, so, there's a difference.
He speaks the Queen's English.
Because he basically was asking me, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm friends with Dallas, He's like, what do you do? I was like, we do a show. We had a show. It's called Duck Dynasty, but he was like, Duck. I was like, duck calls. And I was trying to take him through the process, but
where's he from? Do you know?
I don't know. But we didn't connect.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, I'll check that out. but
he's telling his wife that night, this weirdo was there with the other guy.
Well, I'll tell you that story because what I'm fixing to tell you, everything will make sense. So in this,
none of this makes sense.
In this room, everyone's name is on a seat. So just imagine a movie theater. You go in there, your name is on the seat.
But they don't know you're coming.
Well, obviously not, because we start walking down the aisles kind of looking for our name. And guess what?
That's the
name is not there. So at some point, they're like, we're ready to start. I mean, Dallas is fixed to give a speech. We're still looking. I was like, where's my seat? There's no seat. So the right-hand man, the seats right next to Dallas and Amanda, he gets up and realizes that we need some help. And he's like, well, let me look at your tickets. Well, we finally found the tickets at this point, and we're already in. And he's like, I hate to tell you this, but you're in the wrong room, which makes perfect sense. This is the cast and crew. And he's like, but the good news is I'm going to let you have our seats, him and his wife.
Wow, what a servant.
Acting like Jesus.
Yeah. And so I look at
what
Missy.
Better place to act like Jesus than
I look at Missy, and she's gone Ezekiel 1 for you Bible nerds. Her face was glowing a red tint.
She looked like Maddie.
She was so embarrassed. I mean, she was like, no, we're not sitting in your seat. It's like, we don't have time to go find your theater. It's fine. So they got up, and I saw them later, like someone brought a chair in for him because his wife had a seat.
Yeah.
This dude's over here sitting in a chair. I'm sitting at the right hand of the guy putting this on.
There's got to be a Bible lesson in that, right? So, Jase, our podcast is called Unashamed, but, we could have called it Pure Talk because
that's a good point.
We do a lot of talking here on this podcast. Everywhere I go, they say, is Jase ever going to run out of stories? And I'm like, nope, he loves Pure Talk.
I do.
So one of our sponsors is called Pure Talk, and we love those guys. Of course, Zach tells the story that of how when he was, in the hurricane and couldn't get coverage, that these were the guys that came to the rescue. So if you're with Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile, you could be saving a fortune every month if you switch to Pure Talk. So Pure Talk, who's our sponsor, and Zach's cell phone company, is cutting the fat from the wireless industry. For just $25 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data on America's most dependable 5G network. And listen to this. The average family of 4 saves over $1,000 a year when they switch to Pure Talk. That's real money that's back in your pocket. With Pure Talk's U.S. customer service team, you can switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. You can even keep your phone and your number. Or if you're looking to upgrade your current device, they can help with that too. Switching is easy. Zach tells us all the time he is the proudest Pure Talk customer. So here's what you do. Go to puretalk.com/unashamed to make the switch, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month. Again, that's puretalk.com/unashamed to start saving today. Pure Talk. Wireless by Americans for Americans.
Yeah, like when the Bible talks about when you go to a place and you
don't go sit down front.
Don't sit in the places of honor.
It's happened to me before.
It was just
you get ushered to the back.
That's good for you though. There's the old story of Francis Schaeffer. He who if you've listened to this podcast or the other one that I do, I love Francis Schaeffer. So he was an odd looking guy. He had like back in the 70s had the big goatee and the scraggly hair and but he was one of
kind of working our look before it was cool.
Before it was cool. But he was probably one of the most prolific theologians of the late 70s, early 80s. Very well known and very well respected his work. I mean, very influential in the church. And he comes over here to do an event at a church that also had a homeless ministry. And so when he showed up, they thought he was homeless. And so they had a cot. He actually stayed the night on a cot in the homeless shelter, and he was the keynote speaker for the event the next day.
That's basically what happened to me.
And you know what? He wrote a book after that. I think he wrote a book after that called No Little People. I thought that was pretty good title.
But you know what was fascinating? Of course, we watched it, season 5, the first 2 episodes. Fantastic. As the story has gotten bigger, so has the production. It was exhausting just watching.
So where are we at? Where are you at in the story? Where is season
Passion
5?
Week?
How many seasons are there total?
I think it's going to be 7.
Yeah, there's going to be 7.
Yeah.
So
this is the Passion Week. This will be a big one.
This was at the supper, the Last Supper is kind of the launching point.
Yeah.
And I was like asking these questions. Of course, I shouldn't have been, but I was like, how many people did it take? And he's like, well, there was like 13,000 extras. 13,000.
That's wow.
And you know what I found fascinating? Because I mean, I'm like, well, it was embarrassing that we're here. Maybe God worked this out, or we're just idiots, or maybe a combination of both. But because I was that guy, I couldn't help but ask these questions. You know, I was like, because it was moving right off the bat. There's this huge scene. I'm like, how did you even do that? He said, we actually had to stop because everyone got moved just by the overall scene of what we're doing. He said, everybody, the extras, the cast. He said, even me. And he's like, I couldn't focus on doing this. So I thought it was spectacular.
Which I have a feeling that's going to happen more as they go forward.
Does it go through the crucifixion of Jesus or up to the crucifixion, but not the actual?
I don't know.
They've never said, but I'm assuming it's going to go all the way to the end. Yeah,
I didn't ask that question, and but I know this. That was good. So it comes out in theaters March 28th.
Yeah, which is a couple of days from when after this comes out.
Yeah, and eventually, you know, it comes out on Amazon Prime, but I'm telling you, you're not going to want to wait for that. I mean, it was fantastic. So,
and every time they do one of these, which is a blessing, it winds up being one of the top draws. Usually, that in all of movies, which is great. I'm just kind of making a statement.
Well, there's good, and then there's that. So it was fantastic. But here's what I noticed. Here was the learning lesson in this. Just the fact that we were where we didn't belong. All of a sudden, from that point on, everybody thought we must have something to do with this. So they had an after party at the hotel. We were staying at the hotel where the after party happened.
But you didn't know that?
No. I mean, I was like, this is the craziest thing. So here we are now. We're back at the hotel, and it's like, same pick, come right in.
You got upgraded to first class.
And so then people were like, we really love what y'all did this season. Awesome. And I'm looking around behind me. Because I was
They're telling you this.
Oh, they're telling me this. At first it was like, look, I had nothing to do with it.
But then eventually you were like, yeah, we worked hard on it. And
at some point I just said, yeah, look, we worked hard, it's a team. We had to come together.
Dallas called me and I told him, I said, guys, we got to have more. Yeah.
You're a consultant now.
It's one of the weirdest things that's ever happened in my life. I mean, it was embarrassing, but then it was like, okay, and so then I'm talking to all the writers.
I wish Missy were on this episode right now because she probably has
She probably blamed you for it.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
she blame you for the debacle? Did she say you should have had your ducks in a row?
She blamed us.
She took responsibility.
She said, are we this bad? I mean, we made fun of Tim Tebow because she gave him some recommendations for his playlist of worship music. And he said, yeah, I'll get my guy on that. And she's like, you have a guy who puts the songs on your playlist, which is my point.
Yeah.
You get into this bizarro world. It's a good problem, but it's embarrassing. And we were embarrassed. But
do you have a guy? I don't
have a guy. In fact, now after hearing all this, I'm glad I don't have a guy. I'm glad I just do my own thing.
I did the old fashioned. It's crazy. Like if I want to go somewhere.
But you have a guy. What are you talking about?
Who?
Brad.
Well, sort of. I mean, he's like.
He's a guy.
But I booked my own. Like if I need to go, if I need to drive to Dallas, I can figure that out. Yeah, I mean.
Well, this is where you wind up.
That's what I'm scared of. Yeah.
So it worked out. But the after party, look, the first group of people when I walked in there was a bunch of nuns. And I was like, I've only been to a handful of after parties. I figured Jesus and the Chosen, I'll do it. And it wasn't the party you think, It was more like a change the water to wine party here, It was good. There was nuns there.
Yeah.
And so
you sent a picture of that. I'm good.
I sent a picture because the first person who greeted us was a nun. And they got invited. I think they're help sponsoring with the Hallow thing.
The Hallow.
Oh yeah. Because he's big. Rumi is big on
exactly.
that. Yeah.
I think that's where that came from. So we meet this nun, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a film and TV. What do you call them? They like watch something and say
critic.
Yeah, critic.
Yeah.
I was like, really?
He's a critic, like Siskel. What was it?
Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah.
And so Missy said, "Well, what do you think about the show Duck Dynasty?" And she said, I love that show. She said, those people, you know, and she went on.
Yeah.
Missy said, we are those people. She's like, you're one of those people? And I was like, I'm not sure I like your tone and that. And she said, well, can I have a picture? I was like, on one condition. And she just snapped her head up. I was like, I want to take a picture with you because I've never been to a party with a nun. So we need to document that.
Yeah.
So we traded.
And she had never been to a
selfies.
party with a Duck Dynasty person.
Yeah, but she had watched the show and loved it.
Well,
because
maybe you just got a good review for the new revival show coming up. You may be paving the way. Willie may need to send you out as a publicist now that you've had to do your own media.
I really loved that woman. She was funny. She loved the look, just bubbly.
Yeah.
You know, and she had watched our show. I wonder what you know her first impression was, but she grew to love it. So
Yeah.
So there you go. You know, you look up one day, you try to drive to Dallas. Next thing you know, you're partying with a bunch of nuns, and you're in a place where you really shouldn't have been, which was embarrassing.
You could have been in worse places than partying with nuns.
Yeah.
You know,
That's where you wound
Yeah.
up.
So what's funny is after it was all over, you know, I sent Dallas a nice little, man, that was fantastic. You know, I was like, man, I got a good podcast story, you know, and he's like, what story are you talking about? He never realized that it was all a mix up.
No.
I shouldn't. I mean, he never even thought, I wonder why they put the duck guy. I'm sure somewhere in a meeting right now of the Chosen, they're like, who let the duck guy in the cast and crew enter sanctuary?
But you know, Dallas came on our podcast the first season, like when they were just promoted. It had just happened.
yeah,
The first time he came on. So he probably knows, Jase, that we're
come a long way.
yeah, we're probably we're good promoters of his show, which is amazing. And I love this Hallow thing that all the advertising, Wahlberg's on there, Chris Pratt now. I like that people are recognized Hollywood stars are talking about prayer and God. I mean, that's a major positive for me.
Yeah.
So I love what they're doing. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it made me think just them showing kind of the recap and I guess the future episodes. But my wife's favorite episode is season 2, episode 1. We actually watched it last night because, you know, I had watched it a couple times. She's watched it dozens.
Yeah.
And of course, she cried at the end. I mean, I was like, babe, I thought you've seen this like 3 dozen times. She's like, oh, I cry every time. But it's fascinating for where we're studying in the book of John because, and what I like about their show is they follow the Bible, but they make it about Jesus. I mean, it's called The Chosen. So you're getting Jesus from the perspective
Of the people around him.
yeah, of the 12.
Which I've always thought was a fascinating concept.
Yeah, and like we do in any kind of when you read this stuff,
Is that not what we do? We're trying to look at Jesus through our lens of being in the 21st century. I mean,
that's
what we
they
do. So, Jase, did you hear that bell tolling in the background this morning?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's the bell tolls because April 15th is coming. It's like, you know, one of those old movies where dun, dun, dun.
Tax day.
Tax day. That's exactly right. All of us have struggled in the past with the IRS. I don't know if you've had unfiled tax returns. You can't pay the IRS. Lisa and I have been there before. And it's tough. You know, you got a lot of potential problems out there, wage garnishments, bank levies, even property seizures are on the table. So we need some help. The time to resolve your IRS troubles is now. But going up against the IRS alone is a mistake. So take our advice, call the experts at Tax Network USA. They know the system and they have an edge. They have a preferred direct line to the IRS, which means they know which agents to deal with and which to avoid. Whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, their genius strategies are designed to quickly settle your tax problems in your favor. Tax Network USA's attorneys and negotiators have already resolved over $1 billion in tax debt. Tax Network USA can help you too, but you need to move fast. April 15th is almost here. Talk with one of their strategists today. It's free. Stop looking over your shoulder. Put this behind you by calling Tax Network USA at 1-800-958-1000. That's 1-800-958-1000. Or you can visit tnusa.com/unashamed. That's tnusa.com/unashamed.
So season 2, episode 1, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because what they did was it starts off with John. It's like at a future date, and they come at the date of Jesus has died, been buried, and raised, and he's gone. And now John's kind of interviewing all the followers because obviously he's fixed to write a letter about it, or write a book about it. And so it starts there, but then when it gets to the scene, it starts off with John and what they call Big James on there. They're plowing a field, and they're thinking, "Oh, we're the special one." You know, Jesus has chosen this special moment. Now, this is not in the Bible, but the story that they told kind of links what happens in John 4. And turns out, of course, if you haven't seen season 2, I'm not spoiling it. You should have watched that years ago. But
Catch up.
What they did, they took a couple of stories and brought them together.
Yeah.
Which is, they were actually plowing that field for the guy who owned the field, who was one of the guys who attacked the guy. It's the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. And so one of the guys who attacked who was walking down the road, I have to go over there and look.
In Luke 10?
Yeah, in Luke 10. All right, in Luke 10:25. Yeah, let me just read you this story. So, I have a point. When you get here, it's like, oh, that's good. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, and he asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Which a lot of the book of John has been about. What is written in the law, he replied. How do you read it? He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." You've answered correctly. Do this and you'll live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbor?" In reply, so he tells this story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and he saw him. He took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wound, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." So from the chosen's perspective, they took one of the guy, either the priest, the Levite, or whatever, and that's where this guy lived. He had beaten this guy and lived to tell about it, but somewhere in there had developed some kind of leg injury, and he barely could walk. He didn't have any money, and so Jesus went there, and the whole reason John and James were doing the tilling and all was a garden so he could support himself. And so it's cool that you think, well, why are they doing this? Because he was showing his disciples, because the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along.
Right.
And we learned that in John 4.
Samaritan woman, yeah.
They're all like, well, wait a minute, this guy, he's a thug. Well, in the episode, he basically confesses his sins to Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was one of the guys that beat this up. Now I'm like suffering the consequences of that. So he winds up healing the guy. And meanwhile, you have the other story of the Samaritan woman who's out there being the spokesman for Jesus. So he was basically showing them, look, I came here to bring all people together, which it's really moving. And when you get to the end of the episode where John starts writing, he goes back to in the beginning, was the Word was with God. I mean, it's a fantastic episode, but the main theme of it was their take on breaking down these walls that divide us, whether culturally or where you're from, the hatred between us. Jesus came for everybody. So I thought
it was the same setup, Zach, as the movie The Apostle Paul, the guy that directed our movie,
Andrew.
right? Andrew. It used with that where Paul is being interviewed by Luke,
Yep.
to be able to write Acts. And the same thing where you're looking back and seeing as you come forward, which is just a great filmmaking.
Yeah, Andrew loves to do that.
Yeah. It's a very powerful way to do it.
We're actually doing another film with Andrew.
Are you ready to announce anything?
Yeah. Well, the press has been released, but it's Randy Travis, the country music singer. We're doing his story.
Really?
Yeah. So Andrew's going to direct it, and he's writing the script right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, but I love the technique though of going back, and then referencing that through
which we did the same way.
Yeah. But I think that it's interesting that that's what showing how these cultures are coming together. I mean, it's such a big part of the Old Testament that's kind of missed, that you don't see until you get to the New Testament. And I was thinking Luke 24 on the road to Emmaus when Jesus had been resurrected, and he sees two of the disciples, and they're just distraught over what happened, and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "Are you the only guy who does not know what's happened in the last 3 days?" And they say this weird thing that's so weird if you don't catch it, but they said that this guy named Jesus essentially was that we'd hoped would be the hope of Israel, but he's dead. He's been dead for 3 days. But he wasn't dead, but they thought he was dead. But in their mind, he was going to be the hope of Israel. But if you read through the rest of the discourse, what he's telling them is that the Messiah is going to be the Messiah for all the nations, not just Israel. That would be everybody would be included in. Samaritans, Gentiles, like everybody was going to be included in. And you don't really you see it in the Old Testament when you go back and read it through the lens of Jesus. But they didn't understand that until he opened their eyes to the scriptures.
Yeah.
So I think it's beautiful. Like there was a philosopher named Kierkegaard that said we live life forward, like we're living it forward, but we interpret it by looking back. Hindsight's 20/20. And so you look at your life, you don't fully understand what's going on and why you, like when you first got married, for example, I don't know. Like when I married Jill, I had no clue what I was getting into.
No. Well, I thought I did.
You thought you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you look back at, but I've been married almost 25 years now, and I'm like, okay, I understand it a whole lot more now looking back on it. And I think that is also how the scriptures laid out as well, that we live it forward, but we really can't understand it we understand by looking back, and you see this beautiful story that just is almost like seamless.
Yeah.
And then it expands the bigness of what Jesus accomplished. It is about my own personal salvation and my own personal liberation from sin and a hope of eternal life even beyond this world. But there's also a big, huge collective salvation that Christ that he accomplished on the cross.
Well, and plus you think about the amount of time we're talking about here. This was the Samaritan situation that's being referenced here in these two cases. This has been going on in Jesus' time frame for 750 years. I mean, you think about our country is not even 300 years old. We think, man, way back in the revolutionary days. Well, double that.
Yeah.
And that's when this Samaria issue came in. They were hauled off into slavery. When they came back, they were repopulated. There were all these Gentile influences. So they had been disregarded for 750 years.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus comes in and starts telling these stories, everybody's like, what? I mean, like, this has been a long period of time.
Well, I found it fascinating. When I read N.T. Wright's commentary on John, of course, he got into the geography of it, and that's what led me to this Luke 10, because when he started that story, when he said, in reply, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, well, I didn't realize they did that to avoid going through Samaria.
Right.
And here, so he tells the story. Well, unless you kind of know the geography, you don't get what he's saying. And the hero of the story was the Samaritan who came and helped the guy who had been robbed and saved his life.
Yeah.
So when a woman experiences an unplanned pregnancy, she often feels alone and afraid. And so many times her first response is to seek out an abortion. But because of you and your generosity, that search may lead her to a preborn network clinic where she'll choose life, and not just for her baby, but for herself. And that's the secret of this. It's not, we're protecting life, but the life of the mom and the life of the baby, of course. Preborn offers God's love and compassion to hurting women and then provides a free ultrasound to introduce them to the life growing inside them. We get a lot of great stories from our friends at Preborn. One of those is Paige's story. When Paige found out she was pregnant, she didn't feel she could afford a child. The father threatened to make her have an abortion, but when her mother found out, she introduced her to a preborn network clinic. At the clinic, Paige was given the support and resources she needed to help her choose life, and the father there even started attending parenting classes with her. Now they're raising a beautiful son together. We love stories like that, and we love this ministry. Your tax-deductible donation of $28 sponsors one ultrasound. How many babies can you save? Please donate your best gift today. Just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Or go to preborn.com/unashamed. That's preborn.com/unashamed.
So that's why when you get to John 4, they didn't take the Jerusalem to Jericho. They went through Samaria, and then his disciples were so shocked. What in the world are you doing in the middle of the day talking to a Samaritan woman? Because it says that in John 4. They don't associate. And not only a woman, this woman's got a shady past here.
Right.
And you're alone. I mean, he broke so many.
We talked all the taboos that he broke, right?
Exactly. Well, when I read this, I'll go over and read that Luke 10, which I thought was fascinating about how Jesus tells those stories, which is why I was bringing up The Chosen. They were making the same illustration. It's even the guys in the story of Jesus's story, he wants them too. There's a love for your neighbor. Who is my neighbor? Well, and that's why, the Pharisees and the scribes who watch, because there are modern day Pharisees who watch The Chosen, they're like, well, that story's not in the Bible. But the principle was the same. Not only was he for Samaritans, he was for the people who tried to kill this guy. I mean, he offers forgiveness to everybody, which is why, I don't know, it's really moving to watch. But when I read the first part of Luke 10, that story, he tells, who is my neighbor? That whole story came from there, which you see John 4, a similar instance where she became basically an evangelist.
A missionary.
For Jesus.
Yeah.
You couldn't have worse credentials or criteria to bring before the Lord as far as somebody you would think, oh, here's your missionary, this woman you met at the well. And they really do a good job on the Chosen of showing her character and all.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like you're like, oh my goodness, this woman's a piece of work. I mean, that comes across there. But once she went all in for Jesus, there's something you start liking about her. All her quirks all of a sudden seem like, oh, she's a piece of work, in a good way now. But I thought about this Luke 10, and this is going to tie in to where we are in John 4. Because even though I was surprised at how few times the kingdom is mentioned in the book of John. I mean, it's mentioned in the Gospels a lot. I think it was like 77 times.
Especially in Matthew, yeah.
Yeah. But he had just said, when it is mentioned in John, it's very profound. Because you remember in John 3 where it said, you can't see it or enter it.
Yeah.
He told Nicodemus, the kingdom, unless you're born again.
Right.
And then he's like, born of the Spirit. He was introducing this idea of that. And so then I think John 4, really with what he's doing there, he's introducing the kingdom in action. This is what the kingdom is going to look like. Right. And part of this is going to people that you wouldn't have gone to before. So in the same chapter of that story about the Good Samaritan, which I find fascinating, and you read the same commentary I did with N.T. Wright. He made a big deal about now, when you think about how Samaritan is used, it's a positive thing.
Right.
I think about the Samaritan's purse. I don't know if there's other ministries
Oh,
because
tons.
they focus on that.
There's a healthcare ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
back in this day, when you mentioned the word Samaritan, that was the worst thing on
And
the
when
planet.
you mentioned the word Pharisee, that was a good thing.
Yeah.
We interpret that backwards now, like that's horrible. But if you were a Pharisee in the day of Jesus, that was a place of prestige and
Which, by the
respect
way,
and honor.
same time frame almost 600 years. That had been a positive from Daniel all the way down.
Yeah, when Jesus,
Pharisees were
when
the good
Jesus
guys.
says, "You Pharisees, you brood of vipers," the brood of vipers is the insult. The Pharisees is the identification of who he's talking to.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we say, "You Pharisee," and that we associate it with brood of vipers. But in that, think about those days, man. That was
just
like
the opposite.
yeah, those are the gurus. Those were the religious.
You wanted that
gurus.
guy on your team.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's like I think the Sermon on the Mount sent the Pharisees because he says, unless your righteousness
yeah.
surpass those of the, what does he say, the Pharisees and the scribes,
Yeah.
the teachers of the law.
Right.
So, and you're like, well, what was his point? Because they kind of looked at everything from a legal standpoint.
Right.
It's like, well, we haven't killed anybody, you know. But then, so Jesus in that Sermon on the Mount is like, yeah, but did you want to? You know,
Yeah.
because it got to the heart,
Yeah.
which is really
Which is
what
which
he's
is-
after.
Well, they had written 24 volumes of material on the Sabbath, not pages, volumes,
they
books.
They didn't want to yield their heart, which I think is the main point of the text in John 4 is, and I just did this week. So this is like hits home because, you know, when the storm hit North Carolina, we didn't have water for 8 weeks. Like it washed out 20 something miles of pipes that brought water into Asheville area. So nobody had water. And we had a swimming pool full of water, but obviously you couldn't drink it because it was like disgusting. But we would go out there every day and we'd fill up 5-gallon buckets of that water. And then we'd use that to flush the toilet. We'd have to boil it. And it was a process. I mean, it was like, but we had to keep going back to the source and go through this whole process of making this water where we could actually live off of it. Well, I decided, like, as soon as when the storm was over and everybody was back at it, I said, you know what's never going to happen to me again?
Somebody's digging a well around
I'm digging
here.
a well. And so I got a permit.
Zach's well.
I live in the middle of town, and everybody's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I mean, I'm getting phone calls. What's that big rig? I got a huge rig like in my yard. We're digging a well. So I dug a well this week, and I'm not ever going to be without water again. I'm getting a generator too, but they don't catch me. But this is like the setting here in John 4 because the Samaritan woman, she has to go to this place to get water all the time. And you just imagine how exhausting that is to go fill up and then it gets low, go back, fill up, it gets low throughout the week. It's the continual thing. So the question about where do we worship is not disassociated with where she's at.
That's right.
Because what she's saying is like where do we worship is where's the spiritual well that I go to get filled up? For you guys, it's in Jerusalem at the temple. We Samaritans, our spiritual well is up there on the mountain. So Jesus, where is the real spiritual well to get filled up? And so the call here is that he says if anyone drinks the water that I give him will never be thirsty again. The water I will give him will become, so it's progressive language, will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And so I think about that as almost like what the big picture of what God's doing in John 4. It is all kinds of people, but even more than that, yeah, he's saving all kinds of people. But now worship is going to actually take place in the inner part of your soul, and that will be the source of life. It'll never run dry. He's going to live in human beings now.
That's why I think it's important that when it says John made a point of saying in verse 28, she left her water jar and went back.
Yeah.
You know, because you think all the work, you do it every time. I mean, it's like.
It's why she came there, but not really.
Exactly. She had found something so much greater.
Yeah.
That temporary thing that you always gripe about was irrelevant.
Which is
in
the point of the
moment.
book of Hebrews. If you think about the Hebrew writers making the case that you got to keep that you got to keep going back between the Holy of Holies year after year. the priest, he's got to atone for the sins of the people year after year, but not with Jesus. One sacrifice for all time.
You know, it's funny is the house we lived at before where we are now. When we were building that house, we were the first people, Mac Owen owned the land out there, and we were the first people that built. So there was a road that was built that would lead to other houses. So since we were the first ones, we got to name the road. So we were thinking of all the different names to name it. One day the bulldozer was back there moving around some earth, and he came across a spring, and when he rolled over the top of it, I mean, it looked like a geyser. When I just happened to be watching it when this happened, and I mean, water shot up like 40 feet in the air, you know, and I was like, wow, look at that. And then it hit me, this story, and I thought, I know we're naming the road. Wellspring Road.
Yep.
But it wasn't just the water reminded me, but I thought we're here as a spiritual
Would you
plant.
rather named it Oil Spring Road?
Well,
That'd
if I would have been Texas Tea, you know, but the Beverly Hillbillies came later. We moved in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But when I saw that, I thought we're the wellspring of life. And so from that point forward, everything about us living in that place was we have to be Christ here. And so I felt like we were then his missionaries doing what he calls us to do by his Spirit. And so it's just that same reminder, seeing that. And to this day, it's still Wellspring. We're long gone. We hadn't been there in 15 years, but still Wellspring Road.
I wanted to finish my point about the kingdom. So in Luke 10, when it starts, because we've already talked about this, where we got to, with this guy who answered right, by the way, this teacher of the law, when he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind.
Yeah, he actually condensed it into the right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
But Jesus, kind of like he did on the Sermon on the Mount, said, well, who's your neighbor? I mean, but because then when he heard a Samaritan, like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the point.
And the rich young ruler, I thought about him here too. Remember, he answered right.
Exactly.
But not really.
Yeah, he kept all the commandments.
He kept all the commandments, but he forgot about the give everything for Christ.
So that's why I was bringing this up about that episode, because when Jesus sent out the 70, when he said in Luke 10, it said, after this, the Lord appointed, and some translations say 72, because they took two of the original Table of Nations and broke them in half. But it'll say or 70. And the reason I'm making a point about this is we're going back to the Table of Nations at the Tower of Babel. There was 70 nations listed. I just don't think that's a coincidence that here now, because we all know how that went. Terribly.
Right.
And that's why God chose a specific nation.
By the way, there was also 70 people that wound up escaping Israel to go to Egypt that started the people there.
That's
so,
true.
Now, granted, you got to be a little bit of a Bible nerd to get this, but that was part of the rebellions in the beginning, that all the nations were divided. That's why the Jews hate the Samaritans so much. There's a division among people that we still see it in modern day America, and I mean, it's just what humans do. We like our little camps. And in some camps, we hate other camps of people. And here's Jesus trying to bring everybody together. You get back to the Acts 2, where they all hear the one language from a group of men, despite them speaking different languages. Because God is, one of the themes in this whole book is he's making everything that went wrong right.
Yep.
It just took a few hundred years to do it. And I think this is a shadow here, but I want to. There's something I had missed here that I think is very powerful.
In Luke 10.
In Luke 10, watch how this goes. He sends out the 70 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. And he told them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." And I came here because he's going to say the same thing in John 4. We're fixing to read it.
He does.
And so, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go, and I'm sending you like lambs among wolves. Do not take a purse, a bag, or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. When you enter a house, first say, peace to this house. If a man of peace is there, your peace will rest on him. If not, it will return to you. Stay in that house, eating and drinking, whatever they give you, for the workers deserves his wages. Do not move around from house to house. So he's like, send them out as missionaries. When you enter a town and are welcome, eat what is set before you. Heal the sick. So he's given them this ability and this power who are there, and tell them. But watch what he told them to tell. The kingdom of God is among you. So then watch. When you enter a town and are not welcome, go into its streets and say, even the dust of your town that sticks to our feet, we wipe off against you. Yet be sure of this, the kingdom of God is at hand. I tell you, it will be more bearable in that day, for Sodom than for that town. So whether they embrace you or whether they don't, he said, you have the same message. The kingdom has come to you. And so it made me think the reason when he had that conversation with Nicodemus, and then he uses this same phraseology with the Samaritan woman about, the harvest is plentiful. And I mean, basically you see the kingdom in action here. The king, when you think, well, what is the kingdom? Well, it's where the king reigns. But I've always looked at that as a phrase, but it's literally, it's action.
Yeah.
And what does the king want to do? Well, he wants to bring all the nations back together because all the nations have people. And I made all the people.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me look at that as more of an action that Jesus, here he is limited in space because he became flesh.
Mm-hmm.
He's one man. He introduces this idea of the Spirit coming, and that being a prerequisite to entering and seeing the kingdom. So now here we are, fast forward, we go back to that Acts 2. Jesus pours out his Spirit as he's ascending to the right hand of God. And now through his Spirit, you have thousands of Jesuses going around.
Mm-hmm.
And what would that be called? You're seeing the kingdom being among you, where
Right.
the king reigns.
Right.
And it kind of clicked for me. It's like when he's saying the harvest is plentiful, oh, we need to go out there. Well, no, we just need to let Jesus reign in our heart and do what he does. We do Jesus stuff, which is bringing people together, which is, recognizing people's problems and entering Jesus into that realm. So it kind of made me think, we always think about one-on-one Bible studies and all. It's actually 3. You're representing the fullness of Christ, which all the deity lives in bodily form,
Mm-hmm.
and you have his Spirit. So it's basically 3-on-1, every encounter, every conversation you have, but it's not really you. You're introducing where the king reigns. So that was the connection I made.
Which is why you think about if someone's not receptive, I tell our church this all the time, like you don't have to manufacture some type of evangelistic effort. Like you really don't have to do that. And what will happen if you take that on is you'll spend a lot of time like trying to chase people down. I don't really see that's, it seems like this phrase, the harvest is never the problem.
Yeah.
And I found that to be true as our ministry has been led by the Holy Spirit. I've never found lacking people who want to see a different life, people who want to taste the kingdom. I've never seen in my entire life, as to the degree that the ministry I'm involved in is spirit led and spirit filled. I've seen the harvest be plentiful. The problem's always on the worker side because I want to contain it. I'd rather not be spirit filled. I don't want to yield my life. But when I do yield my life, that the harvest comes. And I think it's what you were talking about.
And that seekers will find, which is the key.
Yeah.
It's like this dynamo. The one thing they said that's helped me the most about anything else is they said, don't focus on what you can't eat. Focus on what you can eat. And that's a simple little saying, but you know what? It helps me a lot.
Yeah,
and it's
good.
the same thing when it comes to the idea of helping people. There are people that are looking, there are people that are not. All we're doing is doing what the Spirit has led us to do.
Well, right.
And that's to put
Well,
put
that's
it out
why
there.
Jesus said in Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom. Well, you're never going to stop doing that.
Right.
Never. You're always going to seek first the kingdom because you have given your life to the king.
That's
So
right.
wherever you go, you have his Spirit, which is why his disciples came up, and he basically does the same illustration he did with the Samaritan woman because they're like, hey, Rabbi, you need to get something to eat. And he's like, because I know, based on what all we've just said, like you're missing the big picture here. And because they were like, what's he doing with this woman? He's like, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. I feel the same way when I do events because we don't travel well as Robertsons, and so I don't eat before I speak. But I'm always amazed at how people who put on the event are obsessed with getting me some food. And I'm like, no, I don't. And they're like, you don't like our food? It becomes like, well, let me take you a box.
We did this for you.
But I'm like, what I'm fixing to share is we're not worried about food right now. And it's the same thing. And so he launches into that speech about my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work.
Which he's also setting the stage when we get to chapter 6. All right, we're out of time. We come back, we'll pick it up there on Unashamed. Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube. And be sure to click the little bell and choose all notifications to watch every episode.